Hey friends, it's Sam from DIY Huntress, and we are back in my apartment for today's video. Now, while the living room looks pretty dang good, if I must say so myself, the bedroom is another story. It needs so much love. And since our landlord is not really cool with the idea of us having a geometric accent wall in our bedroom, I decided to make a geometric headboard instead. I'm super stoked about this project. I think it makes our bedroom look awesome, and I cannot wait to show you how I did it, so let's get started. I have seriously been obsessed with those geometric wood accent walls that I have seen all over Pinterest and on Instagram, but as a renter, I'm pretty sure my landlord would not be pleased with me if I decided to install one of those. I would actually really like to get my deposit back when we move out, so that is why I'm opting for something temporary that can move out of the apartment with me. Now let's talk about the inspiration for this project just for a second here, because a couple of years ago I had saved a project from Bree at Brepurposed where she made a geometric wood accent wall for her mudroom. It is stunning and it definitely inspired me to create something temporary for our bedroom. I've linked that blog post below this video as well as on my own website, so please go check it out. It's literally amazing. Okay, but to get started with this project, what I did was cut a piece of 3/4 inch plywood down to the size I needed using my circular saw and a straight edge guide. Now, to determine the size that I needed for this project, I basically just measured how wide our bed frame was because I wanted the width to match the bed frame. I then created a tentative plan for what I wanted this design to look like using Illustrator, but you can find that plan as well as all of the specs for this build on my website by clicking on the link below this video. Ultimately though, once I was happy with my design, I then used a whole bunch of 1x2 pine boards and cut them to either 45 degree or 90 degrees based on my design and began to lay them out on my board. Now I'm going to be staining everything at the same time at the end of this project, but to make life easier when that time comes, I decided to pre-sand all of the pieces that I'm working with throughout this entire project to 220 grit before putting anything down permanently. I then began to make some tentative measurements for where I wanted things to go, and once I was happy with how things were being laid out in accordance with that plan that I made, I then began to attach everything permanently. Luckily, I partnered up with my amazing friends at DAP Products for this project, and I decided to use the same technique on this headboard that I used on my DIY sliding barn door, where I applied some rapid fuse first and then added some wood glue to the pieces next before attaching them to that backer board using a pin nailer. If you are new to this process, the reason I do this is because that CA type glue holds everything down super firmly, kind of like a clamp, and then that wood glue will then cure over time, making this bond super strong without me having to add any larger brad nails and having to fill major holes later. And just like I do with my geometric wood art pieces, or at least the ones that I've had on my channel, I always like to start my designs using the longest pieces first, and this just helps to make sure that all of the smaller pieces are perfectly aligned later. Honestly, that speed square was my best friend on this project. I used it for every single new row that I started for my design. It just helped to make sure that everything was perfectly either at 45 degrees or 90 degrees throughout the entire project. So in terms of figuring out things like measurements, I basically just kept referring to that tentative plan that I made on Illustrator that I printed out to have in my shop. I would then make a couple of marks on my board for where I thought designs would look great, and then either had to cut my pieces to 45 degrees or 90 degrees depending on where the design started or ended or matched up. I'm not gonna lie, because I couldn't see where lines started and ended on the plan that I made, I did have to do a little bit of trial and error sometimes with, is this a 45 or is this a 90? But that's why I bought a couple of extra 1x2 pieces, so no big deal. I ended up figuring it out eventually, but I guess my best advice here would be if you're doing a design that's like organic, definitely pick up some extra pieces of wood because it's trial and error at some points until you are happy. But just like those other pieces, I began to then apply all of these pieces using rapid fuse and wood glue and then attach them using my pin nailer. Another thing that was definitely helpful was keeping some scrap pieces alongside me while I worked to use as spacers for each one of these pieces that I applied to the backer board. I also didn't worry too much here about the pieces kind of overlapping the board and overhanging a little bit because I'm going to be trimming everything down to its final size later. Another quick tip that really helped me here was keeping a wet rag around, and this just helped for wiping away any of the excess glue that's squeezed out from underneath these boards because it is super tight and it is kind of difficult to sand these down later. So just wiping everything away and being proactive was a great way to make sure that I didn't get any like blotchy stain marks when I stain later. And I know I just spoke about not caring about pieces overhanging, but really the only pieces that I needed to make sure were perfectly cut were the ones that were placed in between two boards, such as the lattice design that you see here. But just like I mentioned in the rest of the build, I then just attached these the same exact way as any other piece using those two types of wood adhesive and the pin nailer. At this point, I was totally in the zone. I was getting work done. I probably could have finished all of these designs within a day, but of course, I ran out of pin nails and ran out of wood at some point and had to stop for the night, call it a night, and then start fresh the next day with some more supplies. Okay, coffee, pin nails, let's do this. So definitely because I had a game plan going into this, jumping back into this build the next day was so easy and so streamlined. I again just started with the largest pieces of my day and then moved on from there. Now, a little trick that I did like to use for some of these pieces was to use this like guesstimate where I would place a piece on to the headboard and then tentatively mark where I needed to make my cut. I would then bring it over to the miter saw and then shave that cut until it fit perfectly into space. This was so much easier than trying to figure out exact measurements and do extra math. It's just a little thing that I like to use here and there, and it worked perfectly for this piece. So in all honesty, if it wasn't for me coming into this project with a laid out plan, I probably would not have been able to get this done as quickly as I did. So weekend warriors, if you are looking for a weekend art project or headboard project or whatever you'd make a project like this for, my best advice is to definitely come equipped with a plan ready to go. I was so tempted to just wing this and see how it went, but because I did take the extra time before starting this project to kind of plan out where I wanted things to go design-wise, I was really able to get this headboard done in a weekend, which obviously made me so happy because as someone who has a full-time job, I'm always looking to squeeze in as many projects as I can on the weekend, and this one felt like a major success. Yes! Once I was done celebrating this completed portion of my build, it was then time to trim away any of that excess overhang, and I did this using my track saw, which is basically just a circular saw that you attach to a track to make a super straight cut. But if you don't have a track saw in your own shop, you can definitely still make a cut like this using a circular saw and a straight edge guide. Once I was done trimming my headboard down to its final size, it was time to start cutting the border pieces for the headboard. And in keeping true with the design, I decided to use some more 1x2 pieces to frame the headboard and cut the ends at 45-degree miters. I then brought the pieces outside, sanded them to 220 grit, and then sprayed them using a satin black spray paint. In total, I'm pretty sure I landed on about 3 coats of paint for the border pieces, and while those coats were drying, it was then time to fill in any of the small gaps and seams that were really kind of like annoying my eyeballs looking at this piece. I really wanted everything to look natural and seamless, so in order to do this, I used DAP's Premium Wood Filler, which is a tintable wood putty, and I mixed it together with the dark walnut stain that I was using on the piece. Prior to this project, I had only applied this tinted wood filler to an already stained project, but I decided to try to fill in all of the little gaps and tear outs before I stained this piece, and it actually worked out really well. And as you guys can see, I basically just applied it to any part of this project that was annoying me using my finger, and then I kind of just allowed everything to dry before coming back to the piece and then sanding it down again to 220 grit. I then vacuumed away any debris that was left over in between all of these nooks and crannies and crevices before then moving on to the staining process. Honestly, I probably could have pre-stained all of these pieces as well as this backer board while I was applying the pieces and doing this project, but I just decided to do everything at once here, and I didn't let the stain penetrate for too long. I basically just applied it in small areas and then wiped it away rather quickly. And by the time I was done staining, the border pieces were completely dry, and it was time to apply them to the piece using wood glue and using nails. At this point, I just then let this headboard air out for a couple of days before enlisting the help of my brother, as per usual, to help me install this headboard in my apartment. At this point, I didn't decide on how high I wanted it to hang, so I did make my brother kind of stand there with it so I could figure out what height I was happy with.
Is the other pillow over there? Don't move, I gotta see what it looks like if I need to hang it higher.
There's the big clamp.
So I know that I mentioned this in my rental makeover video, but I'm the type of renter who doesn't mind making holes in the wall and then filling and patching them in later. So I did decide to hang this headboard. But if for whatever reason you're making a headboard like this and you don't feel comfortable hanging it on the wall, you can add some 2x4 or 1x2 legs or backers to your headboard and then screw those backers directly into your bed frame. For me, I actually used a stud finder to find the studs that were kind of like in the best spot above the bed, and then we removed the headboard from the wall so that I could apply some heavy-duty hanging hooks to the back. Luckily, these studs were actually equally spaced within where I needed them to be, so it was really easy to measure and mark where I needed these hangers to go, and I just applied them to the back of the headboard using screws. It honestly would have been so much easier to pre-drill the holes before I did this, but unfortunately I left my drill bit at the workshop. We then worked together to lift the headboard back up and hang it on the wall, and then I whipped out this giant level that we somehow had laying around the apartment just to make sure that it was perfectly straight. I sometimes do this thing where I allow the internet to trick me into thinking that moving into a new space means that you need to have your life together and your space together in like one day. But the reality is that's not the case. We've now been in this apartment for about 4 months and it's still a work in progress, and I'm okay with that. And although I can't have my dreamy geometric accent wall right now in this particular bedroom, I am so excited with the way that this headboard turned out. This bedroom space is finally starting to feel like an actual bedroom instead of just a storage room, and I'm so excited to work on some more projects for this space over the next couple of weeks. Spoiler alert, the next project may or may not be another project for the bedroom. So if you are interested in seeing some more woodworking projects for this space, definitely make sure to subscribe to my channel. But in the meantime, friends, as always, thank you so much for the love and the support and for watching my video. I cannot wait to show you what I am working on next. But until then, friends, happy DIYing.